It was October 1st, and the crisp autumn air carried that perfect sense of change. Fall was my favorite season, and I was excited to bring some festive spirit into our new home. It was the first time my boyfriend Carter and I would be living together during this season, and I wanted to surprise him with autumn and Halloween decorations. While browsing Facebook Marketplace, I stumbled upon what seemed like a great find, a large green box filled with decorations for just $20. The photos showed the box packed with items, artificial leaves, themed ornaments, and more. It looked perfect, almost too good to be true. The seller, Cody, responded to my message almost instantly. His Facebook profile was oddly vague, with a profile picture showing only a cap covering his face and a blurry lake as the cover photo. Despite the lack of details, he seemed eager to sell quickly. The offer was irresistible. He suggested I come to his house that night, after 9 p.m. While the late hour seemed strange, I agreed. To feel safer, I asked my friend Sally to come with me. The drive there was eerie. Sally, half-jokingly, commented on how sketchy the neighborhood looked. The streets were dimly lit, and the few houses we passed seemed neglected. When we arrived at the address, the first thing we noticed was the silence. No cars in the driveway, just faint lights glowing behind closed curtains. My phone buzzed with a new message from Cody. "You can come right in when you arrive." That gave me chills. I showed the message to Sally, and she immediately suggested we leave. Still, I insisted. We got out of the car and approached the door, but before we could ring the bell, we saw the blinds of one of the windows shift slightly. Someone was watching us. For a moment, we froze, but then the silence was broken by the sound of the front door creaking open. A man peered out, only half of his body visible, and motioned us inside. His appearance didn't help. Shadowy, hunched, with sunken eyes that seemed to stare right through us. Sally clutched my arm, and I could feel her unease. Still, I didn't want to seem weak, so I hesitantly stepped closer. "Cody," I called out, but he didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back into the darkness of the hallway. When we entered, we were hit by a smell, a mix of mildew and something much worse, something that churned my stomach. The dim lighting barely illuminated the room, filled with old furniture and a stained carpet. In the center was a large red box with a green lid. It wasn't the same one from the ad. "Here is," he said, his voice deep and slow, almost dragging. Something felt terribly wrong. I asked him to open the box. He chuckled, a dry, unsettling laugh. "Why don't you do it?" he said, his eyes fixed on us. Sally took a step back, pulling on my hand. "Let's go," she whispered. But my curiosity kept me rooted in place. Finally, Cody gave in. Slowly, he lifted the lid, and the smell that burst forth was overwhelming. It was decay, foul and unmistakable. My stomach turned, and Sally screamed, "Get out!" I didn't wait to see what was inside. We bolted for the door, our instincts overriding any sense of politeness or explanation. When we reached the car, my heart was racing. I glanced back and saw the house's doors slowly close, as if someone was watching us leave for the last time. On the drive back, Sally kept repeating, "What the hell was that?" The next morning, I told Carter everything. He decided to investigate on his own. Later that day, he returned and told me an elderly woman had answered the door, claiming she lived there alone. But the details that chilled me the most came when we looked up the address. Weeks earlier, a man named Cody, suspected of several crimes, had been arrested. But the record showed he was still in prison that night. Since then, I've never trusted online ads again. And to this day, I can't stop wondering what was really in that box, or who, or what was really in that house. In 2019, I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, and decided to spend a rare free day doing something I loved, exploring hiking trails. It was a quiet Wednesday in October, and the cloudy sky created the perfect atmosphere for a solo adventure. My destination was DuPont State Forest, famous for its stunning waterfalls. I was eager to enjoy the solitude of the trails. After driving for about an hour, I arrived at the parking lot and set off on the trail. The path was serene, with the sounds of crunching leaves and distant rushing water as my only companions. After a peaceful walk, I reached Triple Falls, a breathtaking sight with cascading water enhanced by the recent rain. I sat on a rock to take it all in, snapping a few pictures to capture the moment. That's when I saw her. In the distance, a woman stood on the trail, completely still, staring directly at me. She didn't wave, didn't move, just watched. To be polite, I waved at her, but instead of acknowledging me, she turned and walked slowly into the woods, disappearing into the trees. The encounter unsettled me, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just another hiker. I continued my hike, moving toward the next waterfall, High Falls. The view was just as beautiful, and I stopped again to rest and enjoy the scenery. But then, a chill ran down my spine. She was back, standing on the edge of the woods, watching me again. This time, I didn't wave. Instead, I pretended to look at my phone, hoping she'd go away. When I glanced up again, she was gone. My unease grew, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe she was following the same trail. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I reached the covered bridge, the final landmark of the hike, and paused to take more photos. The soft sounds of nature around me were comforting until I noticed her again. She stood at the other end of the bridge, her gaze fixed on me. Her presence was oppressive, as if her eyes were digging into my soul. This time, I decided to confront her. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping toward her. Without a word, she turned and walked away, but not like before. Her pace was unnaturally fast, especially for someone who appeared to be in her 50s or 60s. It was almost inhuman. For a moment, I considered following her, but something inside me screamed not to. I decided it was time to leave. The hike back felt endless, and every rustle in the trees made me jump. I passed a woman walking her dog and asked if she'd seen anyone matching the description of the older woman. She shook her head and said, "No, just you." Her words sent a wave of dread through me. By the time I reached my car, I was relieved but still on edge. Later that night, I went out with a girl I was seeing, trying to distract myself. I told her about the woman, laughing nervously as I recounted the story. She found it amusing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, I went to bed feeling uneasy. I'm a deep sleeper and rarely wake up in the middle of the night, but something stirred me awake around 3 a.m. My room was dark, illuminated only by faint light from the street lamp outside. And then I saw her. She was standing at the foot of my bed, completely still, staring at me with those same piercing eyes. My body froze, and it felt like my heart had stopped. I wanted to scream, but couldn't. Finally, a guttural cry tore from my throat as I scrambled backward against the headboard. She didn't move. She just stood there for what felt like an eternity before slowly turning and walking out of the room. I sat there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. Grabbing the knife from my nightstand, I turned on every light in the apartment, searching every corner. There was no one there. Terrified, I called my dad, desperate to tell someone what had happened. He tried to reassure me, saying it was probably a hallucination brought on by being half asleep. He sounded convincing, but I couldn't shake the vividness of what I'd seen. 2 days later, my mom called with unexpected news. Her estranged sister in Germany had passed away. I'd never met her, but when my mom showed me a photo from the funeral, my blood ran cold. It was her, the woman from the trail, the woman at the foot of my bed. To this day, I can't explain what happened. My family was shaken by the connection, especially because I'd told my dad everything before we even knew of her passing. It made me question everything I thought I believed in. And every October, as the leaves begin to fall, I can't help but feel like she's watching me still. It was a chilly October night, and the air carried the unmistakable energy of Halloween. My friend Carlos and I, both 21 at the time, had a knack for finding trouble in the name of fun. Living in the small coastal town of Brunswick, Georgia, We were bored and restless. So, when the idea of exploring the infamous abandoned house in our neighborhood came up, we jumped at the chance. The house had a reputation. It was old, different from the others, with an unsettling air about it. Stories of its past floated around town. Some said it had been the site of a tragedy. Others claimed it was haunted. Whether any of it was true didn't matter. That night, we decided to find out for ourselves. We grabbed flashlights, stuffed baseball bats into our backpacks just in case, and drove to the house. To avoid suspicion, we parked a few blocks away. The walk there was tense. The street was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. The house loomed ahead of us, dark and imposing, with overgrown weeds swallowing the yard. Circling to the back, we found the door unlocked. That should have been our first warning. But, as always, curiosity outweighed caution. The door creaked loudly as we stepped inside, the sound echoing through the empty space. A wave of stale air hit us, thick with the smell of mildew and something else. Something that made my stomach churn. The inside of the house was even more unsettling. The layout was cramped, with narrow hallways and tiny rooms that felt like a maze. Furniture covered in dust and cobwebs was scattered everywhere, as if the owners had left in a hurry and never returned. The place felt frozen in time, yet there was an undeniable sense that we weren't alone. Carlos wandered into another room, leaving me by myself. The silence became deafening. Suddenly, I heard his voice call out, "Yo, there's still furniture everywhere. It's like they just disappeared." I replied, my voice trembling, "Yeah, this place is weird." Exploring the first floor, I came to a corridor with several doors. One led to a tiny bedroom, its bed dominating the space. Another opened to a bathroom with cracked tiles and a mirror so fogged with grime it barely reflected anything. Finally, I reached the last door. It opened to a staircase leading down into the basement. Something about that basement felt wrong. The air was colder, heavier. But, like an idiot in a horror movie, I decided to go down. The stairs creaked loudly with every step, each sound making me flinch. Halfway down, I noticed a faint glow coming from the bottom. I turned off my flashlight, my pulse quickening. The glow came from 2 tall candles on a small table. But what froze me in place wasn't the candles. It was the rocking chair beside them. It was moving. Someone was sitting in it. The chair faced away from me, but I could see a hand resting on one of the arms, pale, thin, and unmoving. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away. Finally, I forced myself to turn and climb back up the stairs, stepping as lightly as I could. Halfway up, one of the steps let out a loud creak. I froze, holding my breath. The faint candlelight below vanished. The basement was now pitch black. I bolted up the remaining stairs, my heart pounding, and slammed the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to secure it, but there was no lock. I turned and hurried through the house, whispering Carlos's name, desperate to find him. When I reached the stairs to the second floor, I called out louder, "Carlos, we need to go. There's someone in the basement." My voice must have carried my fear, because he stepped out of a dark room and said, "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I whispered. "Let's get out of here." As we made our way back to the rear door, something caught our attention. The basement door, which I was sure I had closed, was now slightly open, and in front of it stood a figure, a shadowy silhouette of a man, completely still. "Go." "Now," I whispered sharply, and we both ran. We sprinted through the backyard, our adrenaline propelling us faster than I thought possible. By the time we reached the car, we were out of breath, but we didn't stop until we were far from that street. In the car, I told Carlos everything I'd seen. He listened in disbelief, muttering, "What the hell?" over and over. Neither of us could make sense of it, but one thing was clear. Someone or something was living in that house. To this day, I don't know who was in that rocking chair or what their intentions were. But I do know one thing. I'll never step foot in that house again. And sometimes, when the nights are quiet, I swear I can still hear the creak of that chair rocking in the dark.